Welcome to the Deep Dive. Now, if you've ever heard the name Adam Smith, your mind probably jumps immediately to, The Invisible Hand, free markets.
The Wealth of Nations, right, that massive book.
Exactly. He's just universally known as the father of modern economics.
And yet today, we're actually going to push the Wealth of Nations aside, deliberately.
Right.
We're going back, back to Smith's first big work, and the one he personally thought was his most important, the Theory of Moral Sentiments. TMS for short.
Okay, TMS. And our sources today, we're looking at everything from the original Stoics like Seneca, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius.
The big names, yeah.
All the way through to contemporary philosophical analyses. And they seem to reveal something pretty foundational and honestly a bit surprising. Smith, the ultimate Enlightenment economist, seems to have built his moral system almost entirely on the bedrock of ancient Stoicism.
It's quite the connection, isn't it? So our mission today, if you like, is a bit of a philosophical archaeology project. We want to uncover those specific Stoic principles, things like rigorous self-command, the absolute sovereignty of your internal judgment, the idea of social duty, and really trace their line directly into Smith's moral thinking. You really can't get Smith the economist until you understand Smith the moral Stoic.
That's a fascinating angle. And before we even jump into the structure of TMS, maybe we should establish that connection a bit more firmly. Because Stoicism wasn't just some dead philosophy they dusted off, was it?
No, not at all. By the time Smith is writing, 18th century, the Stoic tradition had been influencing Western thought for nearly 2,000 years. It wasn't obscure.
Right.
Its influence didn't just, stop when the Roman school formally dissolved way back in the 3rd century CE. You can see these Stoic concepts running through people like St. Augustine, especially his focus on the inner life.
Okay.
And Descartes' rationalism, even Spinoza's ethics. There are echoes there.
So sort of in the intellectual water supply.
Exactly. So for those Scottish Enlightenment thinkers, Smith included, Stoicism wasn't some historical curiosity. It was more like this living underground stream of really profound philosophical insight.
Ready to be used.
Ready to be tapped into, yeah. To help define how virtue should work in this new, dynamic, increasingly commercial society they were seeing emerge. This wasn't dusty history for them. It felt more like practical moral engineering.
Okay, practical moral engineering. I like that. So let's unpack Smith's mechanism for moral judgment then, the cornerstone of TMS, the sympathetic spectator. It sounds simple, but it's actually far more complex than just caring what people think, isn't it?
Oh, much more. It's really the ultimate socialized self-control mechanism. Smith basically argues that nature gave us two critical drives.
Two drive.
Yeah. First, there's the obvious one, the desire to please other people and, the aversion to offending them. That's the social glue, keeps things running smoothly.
Makes sense.
But the second drive is the really powerful one, the one that does the heavy lifting morally. It's the desire to be what ought to be approved of.
Not just to appear approved of.
Exactly. Not just the appearance, but the reality. It's this internal striving for genuine virtue, and it's judged against this imagined impartial observer inside your head.
So this impartial spectator, it's essentially like an internalized Stoic judge, a conscience almost.
Sort of, but very focused. And what's the spectator's highest demand? What does it value most?
Let me guess. Self-command.
Bingo. Self-command. If I feel some intense passion, say, overwhelming grief because I lost my fortune, my job, according to Smith, is to moderate that emotion.
Right.
To bring it down to a level where the spectator, whether it's a real person watching or just that imagined one, can keep time to it.
Keep time to it. What does that mean exactly?
It means they can sympathize completely without being sort of repulsed or alienated by the sheer extremity of my reaction.
Okay.
That phrase, keep time to it, is really critical. If your emotion is just too violent, too overwhelming, the spectator feels, alienated. They can't fully share the feeling, right?
Yeah, it's uncomfortable.
Right. And their lack of full sympathy then creates disapproval in their mind. But conversely, when you successfully exercise that extreme self-command, that moderation, that effort itself becomes the main thing people admire.
So the admiration isn't for the suffering itself.
No.
It's for the moral strength you showed in resisting being overwhelmed by the suffering.
Precisely. And that sounds intensely Stoic already, doesn't it? Where virtue is all about the will, the internal effort, not the external outcome.
It really does. So this framework, did it lead Smith to categorize virtues differently?
It did, and this is brilliant. Smith and his peers in the Scottish Enlightenment, they drew this distinction between two kinds of virtue. And it really speaks volumes about the tension they felt between classical rigor, and the realities of commercial life.
What were they?
He called them the awful virtues and the amiable virtues.
Awful and amiable. That sounds like a bit of a philosophical face-off. Why did he need both? What do they actually mean?
Well, the awful virtues are those really demanding, almost rigid qualities that classical antiquity revered.
Like Roman virtues?
Exactly. Think fortitude, magnanimity, that almost superhuman resistance to pain or injury. They're awful in the old sense of the word, inspiring awe, maybe even a little fear.
Okay.
They require enormous self-command, often pushing right up against the limits of human endurance. Think of that Roman soldier enduring torture without flinching. These virtues are deeply respected, but
what?
they can also be a bit distant, maybe even disruptive to the smooth functioning of everyday social life.
Disruptive? How could fortitude be disruptive? Surely that's always good.
Fortitude itself is good, yes. But when you look at the whole package of classical awful behavior, well, it could include things like relentless, inflexible vengeance, or such intense self-reliance that you basically refuse normal forms of social interdependence. If commercial society needs reliability, smooth contracts, trust, shared good feeling,
Amiable virtues.
right, then that pure, rigid Roman fortitude taken to an extreme could actually be, well, bad for business, you could say, bad for social harmony.
Okay, I see. So the amiable virtues, things like politeness, kindness, benevolence, just general sociability, these are the kind of moral oil that keeps the machine of 18th century commerce running smoothly.
That's a great way to put it, the moral oil.
So Smith is essentially trying to update moral heroism for a mercantile age. He wants the inner strength of the Stoic,
Yes.
but filtered through a more sociable, modern lens.
He wants that inner core of iron, absolutely, but wrapped in the velvet glove of politeness, of amiability. And the source material he uses to show the absolute pinnacle of awful virtue. It's the ultimate classical example.
Socrates.
Socrates drinking the hemlock.
Right. And Smith's description of that scene in TMS is incredibly telling for his whole spectator theory, isn't it? He points out Socrates is maintaining this gayest and most cheerful tranquility as he drinks the poison.
Astonishing composure, yeah. Meanwhile, his friends, they're weeping uncontrollably, falling apart.
And Smith analyzes that contrast so perfectly. The friends, who are the sympathetic spectators in this scene, they're actually free to indulge their grief. Smith says they know their sorrow won't actually transport them to, like, extravagance or madness. They're almost pleased with the intensity of their own feeling because it proves their moral sensibility, their capacity for sympathy.
Right, they get to feel deeply without consequence.
But the person actually suffering Socrates, he has a much harder job. As Smith puts it, Socrates has to consciously turn away his eyes from the unpleasant reality of dying.
Force his focus elsewhere.
Exactly. And fix his thoughts entirely on the agreeable reward, the applause and admiration he knows he's earning through his heroic magnanimity, which is really the internal approval of the impartial spectator.
And that is the core Stoic mechanism right there in action, that ability to elevate yourself above absolutely crushing personal misfortune by focusing purely on the internal decision, the choice to act nobly and virtuously.
It's all about the internal choice.
That is the highest form of self-command for Smith. If Socrates had sunk into despair and dejection, Smith notes, he would have appeared mean and despicable.
Wow. Mean and despicable. Why? Not because his situation was less tragic, surely.
No, the tragedy is the same. He'd appear despicable because his weakness would have shown a fatal lack of self-command. And it's that self-command which Smith, really following the Stoics here, sees as the absolute basis of moral strength and, crucially for his system, the thing that earns social admiration.
Okay, that idea of internal focus, internal control. It takes us straight into the heart of the original Stoic sources themselves, doesn't it?
Yeah.
If Smith's external morality is all built on demonstrating internal control, we really need to look at how the Stoics built that control system, the famous inner citadel.
Exactly. And this is where Epictetus comes in. You know, the former slave-turned-philosopher. His central doctrine is key here.
The dichotomy of control.
The dichotomy of control. Epictetus basically says this is the absolute key to achieving tranquility, fearlessness, and freedom. The universe, he says, is divided neatly into two columns.
Things we can control, things we can't.
Simple as that. We control our opinions, our impulses, our desires, our judgments, our responses, basically, our inner world. We do not control our body, our property, our reputation, political office, or, the random events of the external world. Earthquakes, plagues, other people's actions.
Okay, but I have to push back a bit here. Doesn't this kind of philosophy risk downplaying the very real impact of external hardship. Things like poverty, systemic injustice, real physical suffering. Isn't it a bit too easy to tell someone suffering those things, oh, it's all about your attitude?
That is the necessary challenge, absolutely. And the Stoic answer is, well, it's uncompromising. They certainly recognized suffering. They weren't naive.
Okay.
But they argued that while external factors might inflict pain, physical or emotional, they cannot inflict moral harm. True harm for a Stoic is only caused by your internal judgment and your agreement to a faulty impression about that external event.
So the harm comes from judging the event incorrectly.
Precisely. And this leads us straight to the essence of the self, what Epictetus called prohairesis.
Prohairesis, that's that key Greek term, often translated as moral purpose or will or volition, something like that.
Yeah, all of those capture parts of it. Literally, it means something like the pre-choice or the choice before choice.
Choice before choice.
Yeah. Epictetus argues that the absolute essence of who we are, the core good or evil of a person, is located entirely in this mental faculty, this ability to choose our response before we act.
Okay.
And the crucial element here, the thing that makes it the foundation of inner freedom, is that prohairesis, he says, is inherently free from hindrance and impediment. Meaning nothing external, not an emperor, not a war, not poverty, not torture, can actually touch your capacity to choose your inner judgment about those things.
So even if my body is literally chained up, my prohairesis, my power to choose my response, is still free.
That's the claim.
If I lose all my money, the will to judge that loss constructively, that remains intact.
Yeah.
Wow. That forces absolute accountability then, doesn't it? If the ultimate cause of your distress is always internal, then blaming outside forces. Well, Epictetus would say that that's just being dishonest with yourself.
Exactly that. You hear it in his discourses. When students would try to blame external forces, I was compelled by fear of death to betray my friend, Epictetus would shoot back.
What would he say?
He'd say something like, it is neither death, nor exile, nor toil, nor any such thing that is the cause of your doing or not doing anything, but only your opinions and the decisions of your will. You, and only you, are the sovereign of your own moral landscape.
That's stark. So this concept of prohairesis, this core choosing faculty, it works together with another key idea, the hegemonikon, the ruling faculty.
Right. The hegemonikon is like the command center of the mind where the actual judgment takes place. Prohairesis is the power to judge. Hegemonikon is where it happens.
Got it. So if these two faculties form that inner citadel, and they govern our entire moral response, then it seems to follow logically that negative emotions must also be, well, internal cognitive errors, mistakes in judgment.
That's precisely the Stoic analysis of negative emotions, or what they called passions, pathai. This was really pioneered by Chrysippus, one of the early heads of the Stoa, and later clarified brilliantly by Seneca.
Right.
They didn't see passions as just raw feelings bubbling up. They saw them as cognitive mistakes originating from faulty judgments or opinions we hold.
And Seneca famously called anger a temporary form of madness. That suggests these extreme negative emotions are almost like little mental illnesses that hijack the command center, the hegemonikon.
Exactly, a temporary insanity. And why do they seize control? Why do we make these faulty judgments? The Stoics said it's because we fall prey to the false belief that external things, contingencies like money, status, reputation, health even, are actual goods essential to our happiness or evils destructive to it.
So if I genuinely believe that losing my reputation is a true disaster, an absolute evil,
then the resulting pain, the shame, the anger, whatever follows that feeling is basically inevitable because you've already assented to the faulty premise. You've judged wrongly.
Okay, so how does this cognitive error actually unfold? I know the Stoics broke down the generation of a passion into, 3 stages?
Yeah.
And the key is intervening somewhere in that process.
Exactly. Intervening between stages 1 and 2 is the entire goal of Stoic psychological practice.
Okay, stage 1.
Stage 1 is the involuntary first movement. This is just the natural physiological reaction, the pre-passion. It's totally outside of our control.
Like jumping at a loud noise.
Yeah, or your heart skips a beat. You might go suddenly pale or feel that physical shock of surprise or bad news. It's purely biological, automatic. You can't stop that.
Okay, uncontrollable first movement. Then we hit the crucial pivot point, stage 2.
Stage 2 is the judgment or the assent. This is the moment where the mind, the hegemonikon, evaluates that involuntary impression from stage 1. It decides, does this physiological flutter actually correspond to a real threat, a genuine injury, a true evil?
And this is where the choice lies.
This is the moment of choice. If you assent to the impression, if you agree, yes, this event is truly bad, this insult is a genuine harm, then you move inevitably to stage 3. That act of assent is entirely within the domain of your prohäresis. You choose to agree or disagree with the initial impression.
Okay, and stage 3 is the runaway train, the fully formed emotion or passion.
Correct. Once that judgment, that assent has been made, the full-blown emotion is generated, and according to the Stoics, it becomes pretty much uncontrollable at that point.
Yeah.
Crispus used this great analogy.
Yeah.
He said it's like a body thrown off a high building. Once it's thrown, once the initial push is given, you can only wait for the momentum to cease when it hits the ground. Similarly, once you assent to that impression of injury or loss at stage 2, you basically have to just wait for the resulting passion, the anger, the grief, the fear to naturally subside. You can't just switch it off.
So the entire philosophical task, the whole point of the training, is preventing that assent at stage 2.
Yeah.
Don't agree with the faulty impression in the first place.
That's the game. Don't endorse the initial involuntary flicker as representing reality. And this is precisely why Smith's requirement for self-command is so fundamentally Stoic. He's asking us, in social situations, to prevent the manifestation of a passion by controlling the underlying assent that creates it.
The theoretical structure is really clear then. Virtue comes from mastering that internal judgment at stage 2. But the Stoics, they weren't just armchair philosophers, were they? They were intensely practical.
Oh, hugely practical.
They didn't just write these dense treatises. They developed, daily philosophical exercises, a whole toolbox for training that inner judge, that hegemonicon.
Absolutely, a mental gymnasium.
And the first one, probably the most famous, is that nightly review of actions.
Yes, the self-interrogation. Seneca recommended it strongly, though he was drawing on earlier thinkers like Sextius. The idea was, every single night, before sleeping, you basically hold a little tribunal for yourself.
Put yourself on trial.
In a way, yeah. You scan the entire day, retrace every deed and word. And the questions were specifically designed to help moderate future passions. Things like, which of your wrongs did you correct today? Which fault did you resist? In what way are you better?
It sounds almost like a kind of spiritual audit.
Yeah.
But you're saying the goal wasn't self-flagellation or beating yourself up.
No, absolutely not. The purpose was therapeutic and really forward-looking. Seneca genuinely believed that if your anger, for instance, knows it's going to have to appear before this internal judge every single night, it will naturally become more moderate over time. It just gets trained. It forces the individual to shift their mental energy away from what Seneca was always lamenting, all the pointless busyness.
Chasing status and money.
Right, the constant hustling for external stuff, and redirect that energy toward developing their inner moral life, their character.
That daily accountability, that sounds really powerful. But there's another practice, the premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of future adversity, that one seems almost designed to increase anxiety, not reduce it. You're telling me to sit around thinking about bad things happening.
It definitely sounds counterintuitive, I grant you that. But the Stoics insisted its purpose was precisely the opposite. To eliminate emotional shock.
Shock?
Yeah. When disaster strikes unexpectedly, out of the blue, the shock itself hugely amplifies the passion, the suffering. So by briefly, calmly rehearsing potential misfortunes, losing your job, a friendship ending, facing unfair public criticism, you essentially inoculate yourself against the sudden surprise. The blow lands more softly because you saw it coming.
Okay, so if I, say, visualize being unfairly criticized in a meeting at work, when it actually happens, it's less jarring because my mind has already processed the possibility of that external event. It's not completely new territory.
Exactly. Seneca made the point that we often suffer more in imagination, fretting about things, than we do in the actual reality when it occurs. This practice forces you to confront the basic reality that external things are temporary and fragile. They can be lost.
I don't know, right?
The goal isn't to wallow in potential misery, not at all. It's to mentally confirm, okay, if this happens, my prohäresis, my core self remains intact. I can choose how to respond. Now, Seneca did admit the practice carries a risk of causing undue anxiety for some people.
I can imagine.
But for the seasoned practitioner, he argued, it's preparation, not morbid prophecy. It builds resilience.
And this leads perfectly into the broader Stoic view of adversity itself. They didn't teach avoidance at all costs, did they? They taught acceptance, even utilization.
They completely reframed suffering. As
Yeah.
Seneca loved using military analogies here, he'd say, a good general doesn't send his rookies into the toughest spots. He sends his finest, most experienced soldiers into the most difficult, perilous battles. Therefore, If the universe or providence or nature sends hardship your way, it's actually a compliment. It's a mark of your virtuous character, a sign that you're considered strong enough to handle it.
So misfortune is a test.
A test and an opportunity. Excessive good fortune, they thought, was actually detrimental. It breeds laziness, complacency, weakness. Misfortune, on the other hand, is the gym for the soul. It provides the necessary resistance to develop true virtues like patience, endurance, and resilience.
It really is the ultimate, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. The philosophy, isn't it? Now, this very rigid definition of inner duty, focusing inward so much, it must have had profound implications for how someone like Smith, influenced by this, viewed an individual's place in society, especially the concept of obligation in a big, complex commercial world.
Oh, absolutely it did. The Stoics formalized this really powerful idea of cosmopolitanism, the notion that every individual is a citizen of not one, but two commonwealths.
Economist.
Yeah, it's this beautifully layered view of belonging. You see it articulated by thinkers like Heracles, and Seneca talks about it too.
So what are these two realms?
Okay, first, there's the local community assigned to you by birth, by chance. Your city, your nation, your family, you have immediate, concrete duties right here.
Makes sense, your local responsibilities.
Right. But second, and more fundamentally, there is the vast, truly common state, the cosmos, which embraces all gods and all human beings. In this commonwealth, citizenship isn't measured by where you were born, but by the path of the sun, by reason itself. This is the universal duty we all share towards reason, justice, and basic human fraternity.
Wow, so we have duties to our immediate neighbors, our countrymen. But underpinning that is this universal duty to reason and humanity, which actually transcends purely local laws or customs.
Exactly. If local laws require you to act unjustly or cruelly, your higher duty to the universal commonwealth to reason actually supersedes it. It provides a basis for moral critique of local practices.
That's a powerful idea.
And Heracles visualized it as concentric circles, starting with the self, then family, then local community, then country, and finally extending outwards to encompass all of humankind. We're asked to constantly try and draw those outer circles closer in, extending our concern.
And you can see how vital that universal perspective would be for Smith, the economist, right? He needed a moral framework that could justify and regulate trade and interaction with people far outside your own little village or nation.
Precisely. It provides the moral basis for trusting and dealing fairly with strangers in the marketplace.
And Epictetus, he gives us that wonderful metaphor for navigating all these different social roles we find ourselves in, the actor analogy.
Ah, yes. It's brilliant in its simplicity, isn't it? Life is a play, he says, and you haven't chosen your role.
Nope.
Maybe you're cast as a wealthy official, maybe a beggar, maybe a teacher, maybe a slave, like Epictetus himself was. You also didn't choose the plot, the script, or how long the play runs.
So what is your job?
Your task is not to complain about the role you've been given. It's simply to play the part you find yourself in as best as you possibly can, with skill and virtue.
So the external factors, the stage costume, as it were, like your rank, your wealth, your job title, those are outside your control. They're given to you.
Just like the script.
But the voice, how you speak your lines, how you perform the role, the actual content of your character shining through that is what reveals the authentic person. And that's entirely within your control.
Perfectly put. And this actor analogy directly informed their resistance to things like corruption and tyranny. Seneca, for instance, deeply admired Socrates for declining that invitation to go join the court of a Macedonian king.
Why? Sounds like a good gig.
Because Socrates knew it would mean entering a life of what Seneca called voluntary servitude.
Voluntary service.
Yeah, the kind that arises when you accept royal gifts, favors, positions that create unending obligations, and inevitably compromise your moral independence, your freedom to speak truth to power. Seneca related this directly and quite poignantly to his own incredibly precarious existence trying to navigate the court of the Emperor Nero, always trying to play his part well without losing his soul.
It always comes back to protecting that sovereign inner core, that prohairesis.
Yeah.
And the goal of all this practice, all these exercises, it wasn't about achieving sudden, instant perfection, was it? It was about the journey.
Exactly. The goal for Epictetus wasn't perfection, which might be impossible for most, but continuous moral progress. The Greek word is prokopi, progress. And progress is shown, he insisted, not by eloquently reciting philosophical theory or, debating technicalities.
How by showing off how much you know.
No, it's shown by actually exercising your pursuit and avoidance, your desire and aversion, conformably to nature, meaning aligning your choices with reason and virtue in real life.
So the practical signs of progress are observable changes in behavior and attitude.
Yes. Like genuinely ridding your life of lamentation and groaning, of complaining about externals, and learning what concepts like death, exile, prison really entail, understanding they are externals, not true evils, so that you can face them with composure if or when they arrive.
It's incredibly practical, isn't it? A very grounded kind of virtue, focused entirely on the consistency of your inner effort, your inner state, rather than on external achievements, which are always fleeting anyway. What an incredible synthesis this is turning out to be. When you really look at Adam Smith's entire moral project in the theory of moral sentiments, it seems it fundamentally relies on this really robust, ancient psychological structure derived from Stoicism.
It really does. His whole social system, the impartial spectator demanding moderation, the need for self-command to earn approval, it's almost like the external social reflection of that core Stoic ideal, that our true moral worth is internal, self-generated, and ultimately invulnerable to external fortune.
And for Smith, the guy who would go on to basically invent modern economics, this framework was absolutely essential, wasn't it?
You have to think it was. Smith needed a moral philosophy that could ensure market participants were fundamentally reliable, accountable, and maybe most importantly, temperate.
Temperate.
Yeah, a world built on just frantic passion, uncontrolled greed, fits of rage, paralyzing fear. That kind of world is inherently unstable. It's bad for long-term prosperity, bad for trust. The Stoic framework provided the kind of underlying moral infrastructure that made what he called the gentle commerce of the Enlightenment seem plausible and sustainable. It requires self-controlled actors.
It's amazing. And the really remarkable part is how that framework, thought up and refined 2,000 years ago, continues to shape modern thinking. Especially, it seems, in psychology.
Oh, the legacy is huge there. The most obvious direct line is the influence on cognitive behavioral therapy.
CBT.
When Albert Ellis developed rational emotive behavior therapy, or REBT, back in the 1950s, which was really a major precursor to modern CBT, he explicitly cited the Stoics, especially Epictetus, as a key influence.
And the core idea is Stoic.
Entirely. The whole therapeutic process is Stoic. You identify that psychological distress is caused not directly by events, but by our faulty judgments. Ellis called them irrational beliefs about those events.
It's the direct application of that stage 2 intervention we talked about.
Exactly. The therapist helps the patient challenge their automatic, often destructive assent to those initial negative impressions. They work on cognitive restructuring, changing the faulty judgment to prevent the resulting stage 3 passion, the negative emotion like anxiety or depression. That is pure Epictetus in clinical practice.
Incredible. Are there other modern echoes?
Well, you also see that strong Stoic emphasis on the power of choice and resilience in logotherapy.
Logotherapy, founded by Viktor Frankl.
That's the one. Frankl, as you know, endured the absolute horrors of Nazi concentration camps. And his core insight, developed through that unimaginable suffering, was profoundly Stoic.
How so?
He realized that although literally everything external had been stripped away from him, his body subject to torture, his family gone, all possessions confiscated, the one thing his captors could not take away was what he called the last of the human freedoms.
Which was?
The freedom to choose his attitude, his inner response, in any given set of circumstances, to choose how he would face his suffering.
That concept. The freedom to choose your response, even when facing absolute external deprivation and horror. That is the invincible proheresius in action, isn't it?
It absolutely is. It demonstrates the enduring, radical utility of this ancient philosophy, even in the darkest of times.
So, to leave our listeners with a final thought, perhaps we should reflect on this radical insistence on resilience that Smith clearly inherited from the Stoics. How does it stack up against other views?
Well, it's fascinating to contrast it directly with the position often associated with Aristotle, sometimes summed up by the phrase, the fragility of goodness.
The fragility of goodness.
Yeah. The Aristotelian view is a bit more, perhaps, commonsensical or tragic. It accepts that certain external factors, things like extreme poverty, severe trauma, torture, war, the loss of loved ones, can genuinely damage or even destroy a person's capacity for virtue and flourishing. If external life is cruel enough, your character itself can be obliterated. You need some basic external goods to even have the possibility of being virtuous.
But the Stoics just flatly rejected that premise.
Completely. They held firm. The rational mind, the hegemonicon, your core reasoning faculty, remains fundamentally unhindered and unimpeded no matter the catastrophe raging outside.
No matter what.
No matter what. Your body might be carried away by the flood, as they'd say, your possessions might be confiscated, your reputation ruined, but your capacity for rational choice, for inner virtue, for ascent or descent is always yours to command. It cannot be touched unless you allow it to be. And this deep belief in the ultimate sovereignty of the rational self, the potentially invincible soul, that is the profound, perhaps challenging moral foundation upon which the father of modern economics ultimately built his entire worldview.
An incredible reminder, then, that the ultimate currency, even in a world obsessed with economics, might just be how we choose to respond inwardly to whatever life throws at us.